Welcome to Happily Ever Aftermath.
The podcast where we discuss relationships in movies and our relationships with them.
I'm Polina Grenville.
And I'm Diana Rojek-Sconard.
Hello, Diana.
Polina, thanks for inviting me into your elephant.
Always. Anytime I'm in an elephant, you are more than welcome.
Oh, and I see that we're not alone. I see that you have brought a writer with us.
Yes, of course. You always bring a writer into an elephant.
I mean, theoretically, I should be jealous, but hi. Wait, no, we've met before. Hi, Meg.
I was hiding in the trunk the whole time.
I thought I heard singing under there.
Good to see you.
Good to be back. Thank you so much for having me back for Ewan MAYGregor? Yes. I'm delighted to be here.
No, that's totally awesome. Yes, we are smack dab in the middle of a new theme month, Ewan MAYGregor.
I've loved Ewan McGregor since Shallow Grave, and it's my birthday month, so I'm very happy that this is the month of Ewan McGregor.
Nice. And fortunately, Meg has joined us for the movie. Oh, it's got an exclamation point, so it's Moulin Rouge.
Moulin Rouge.
Yeah, from 2001, and from IMDb, the basic description is: a poet falls for a beautiful courtesan whom a jealous duke covets. And I've been reading a lot of like Regency romance lately, so dukes are usually pretty not this angry. Well, sometimes they're angry, but this duke man, he is something in this movie.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. He's
a literal mustache twisting villain, pretty much.
Direct.
He wants what he wants.
He just doesn't like it when other people touches his things, and I decided not to yell that.
But he does a lot.
Yes. So Moulin Rouge. It stars Nicole Kidman, the aforementioned Ewan McGregor, John Leguizamo, the wonderful Jim Broadbent. In lots of things, people are like, "Oh, hey, it's that guy." The mustache twirling Richard Roxburgh. There's a lot of other people, so feel free to jump in. I know there's some like random voice cameos with like Kylie Minogue and Ozzy Osbourne. I want to give a shout out to a David Wenham that Ryan pointed out, and he's like, "Did you know that there was David Wenham?" And I'm like, "What?" We had to jump back because he was wearing a nice bob. But to the lay people, it was Faramir.
Dang it, I wanted to bring that up and quiz you and say, hey, Diana, did you notice Faramir in here? Yes, he plays Audrey, the original playwright whom Christian replaces.
I'm now trying to imagine if he had just stuck around the whole time. It would have been interesting. I do enjoy some Faramir, but to answer your question, no, Ryan had to tell me. And I'm glad he did. So Meg, Moulin Rouge, when I pitched the original Ewan McGregor concept, you said Moulin Rouge, and tell me what is up with you and Moulin Rouge.
Moulin Rouge holds a very, very special place in my heart, especially when it comes to romance movies. This is probably the first straight up 100% romance that I really, really liked. I had liked romantic relationships in movies and shows before this movie, but they were usually sort of ancillary to the main plot. But in Moulin Rouge, the love story is the story. And it came into my life at kind of just the perfect time. I don't think I would have felt so much for this movie, or it would have resonated with me so much had I encountered it at a different point in my life. But Moulin Rouge came out right at the end of high school for me.
Very important times.
Very important time. So I have to admit, I was a bit of a late bloomer. And at this point in my life, I had never had a boyfriend. I had never been kissed. And arguably, I'd never even been on a date. So I don't think I consciously realized this when I first saw Moulin Rouge. But looking back on it now, it's like Christian was me and I was Christian. I had never been in love, but I was obsessed with the idea of love. So I was this lovelorn 18-year-old, really wanting love. And then here comes this movie starring Ewan McGregor, who I was also totally in love with ever since seeing The Phantom Menace. So it just really hit me at the right time.
Wow. Okay, first off, that is very soul-bearing, so greatly appreciate you sharing that with us. Second of all, please give me my diary back, and why did you highlight over passages that said Ewan McGregor and all that other stuff? Because I also graduated when this movie came out from high school. I also had not had a relationship, had not been kissed. Dating was questionable because, prom and all that other stuff.
Right.
But, it's one of those things where if someone asked you, yeah, I've been on a date, but like in your 30s, it's like, no, I don't know if that really...
That wasn't actually a date. We're just in the same place at the same time.
Right.
Yeah, maybe, kind of, possibly, maybe. Shut up. I don't know. So I believe I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but as a different late bloomer, I didn't even get like normal celebrity crushes. My John Cusack thing, I guess we can say, was more of like a thing. See, it's a thing. I can't even explain it because it's just like John Cusack is supposed to be with his heroines, and I'm supposed to be here very happy that he's happy, whereas my friends would get celebrity crushes, and I would just tag along for the ride. So my best friend Aaron did very much like Ewan McGregor. So I'm like, all right, I guess this is the guy now. So I got to see Shallow Grave. I got to see all of these different movies that he was in. We watched The Velvet Goldmine, at least the first 15 minutes of it, and then I panicked and turned it off because it was not the same thing as all the other movies that we had seen with Ewan McGregor in it. So we went back to watching him with his Obi-Wan Kenobi-ness.
So what was it about The Velvet Goldmine? I don't remember.
It was the full frontal, Polina.
So that means you
watch
turn
the
it
photo
off.
book.
Yeah.
I think that was harder to get because it was like international. So it's like I had, what was it? So there was no Netflix back then. There was eBay and there was like Academy Awards screeners. So you can only go with what you could get. And so I got Shallow Grave, which was great because any introduction to Danny Boyle is a good thing in my book.
I love that movie. Actually, I feel like I should really rewatch that movie. That's one of I love that movie.
Yeah. So we had that. We had Little Voice. We had Brassed Off. We had A Life Less Ordinary. We had Star Wars that was still in the theater. So we went to the theater many, many times. 8 times in the theater. Woo! I wear that with pride now. If anyone asked, it was for Jar Jar. Woo! Yeah.
Don't say it was for Jar Jar.
That's the funny part. Yeah. So it was pretty interesting. But what's funny is that after a point, like right when Moulin Rouge came out, it all kind of went away. So
what went away? Your love for Ewan?
Well, it wasn't my love. It was a commandeered love, and
and
your love wasn't real.
Well, my love wasn't real. My love was like a loyalty of just like, I don't even know how to get into it. So okay, all right, Meg, you bared your soul. I'll bare my soul for a minute too. So Aaron and I had a falling out. And so because we were no longer really friends or friendly, there was no reason for me to be interested in Ewan McGregor anymore, except for his regular attractiveness that by that point, late bloomers don't really do anything with that. So I was like, I'm out. And then Moulin Rouge came out, but by then I was already out. It was weird.
But it's peak Ewan.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, is that really fair to say that? I mean, has he hit peak Ewan yet?
Oh, I think so. Sorry, Ewan. Unless he does get that Obi-Wan Star Wars series that they have been talking about for Disney Plus, which seems to be in limbo. I really hope it happens, but questionable whether it actually will or not.
Did you see the second? Oh, sorry.
No, it could still happen. What were you saying, Polina?
I was asking Meg if she'd seen this Train Spotting 2 or whatever it was called.
I did not see Train Spotting 2. I, of course, saw Train Spotting, but I didn't feel the need to watch the sequel, I guess is what I would say to that. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I have actually, and it's really good. But of course, so Train Spotting, like the movie and the book and the play, sort of featured kind of prominently in my life in the circle of my friends for a while. In the 90s, we worked on a play. My friends who worked on the play worked at the place where like the American premiere got produced. And anyway, and I really, really liked Irving Welsh, who's the writer. And so Train Spotting 2, actually, I saw when a lot of people were kind of back in town. And it kind of it sort of was a reunion, much like the movie was a reunion. And so I don't know if my love for it is actually like that it's a good movie, or it's sort of like, as you said, like came at a perfect time. It's just like the song that you're like, is that a really good song? Or you're just like, it captured my emotions. But seeing Ewan McGregor, it's just, so, I mean, I don't think it's peak, but I don't know. I'll watch him do things. I'll watch him.
Oh, me too. Definitely.
So I don't know if it's peak, but yeah, this is a great movie for it. Also, so I saw this movie in the theater, and I was so excited for this movie because I love Baz Luhrmann. I like musicals. I absolutely love Nicole Kidman. Like, I have such a crush on her. And I had as I said, like a crush on Ewan McGregor. I saw it in the theater. I think because I was quite, obviously 10 years older than you guys. When I saw it, it was, and actually my friend and I something had happened that day. I think either one of us like lost her job or something, maybe not lost her job, but like something. And we had met up to go to dinner, and we ended up a little drunk when we ended up at the theater. So I was like, and so because we like got there just before it started, and it was a relatively big movie. We ended up having to sit super close to it. And it was just overwhelming. Like we're a little drunk. This is actually my friend Karen that you know. Diana, that you've met, yeah. Redheaded Karen. And she was just like, we're just both like, this is madness. Like, what is happening? I mean, we're kind of prepared because, we knew what it was, but like, it comes at you real fast. And of course, like, I don't know. I think at that point, I probably I totally like loved the love story. But it was just fun watching those two people like make out, really, and pretending it was either one of them. But like, I definitely, it definitely is one of those movies that like rewatching it, I was like, I remember so much of this movie, like so much more than I thought I did, and yeah, but I don't know. I don't think it had that same, like, I think it was just like that way that you have with a movie musical where you're like, I've given myself over to this world. And all of the love stories make super sense in this world, but like, I realize they don't actually make sense in this sort of like, but it's just, they are, like you're rooting for them and you're like, oh, I know she's going to die of consumption. Obviously, like at the beginning, they tell you what's going to happen. You just kind of watch it happen. But
I think that's a perfect way to say it, that it's not a realistic movie, but the movie knows that, that as a viewer. It's very fantastical. It's magical almost. It's its own fairy tale. So buying into that world is very easy to do. And then it's also very easy to buy into this fairy tale romance, which is, I think, why I liked this story compared to other romantic movies, because in most of the other romantic movies I'd seen up until this point in my life, it was a contemporary, modern, ostensibly realistic setting. And I just found that the love story was unrealistic and I wasn't able to suspend my disbelief. But with Moulin Rouge, it's pure fantasy, love story included. So it was easier for me to sort of swallow the premise.
That's funny. I feel like you just articulated something I was thinking about when I was watching the movie, because, you know, we did our last episode, we also did a musical. And I realized that I completely am always like, oh God, this is such a ridiculous like romance. It's so unrealistic. And then, but yet, you know, there's literally nothing more ridiculous than, I mean, there's probably a lot more ridiculous, but Guys and Dolls has a really, really, really ridiculous premise. And the love story is just unworkable and strange. But like, you're caught in that world. And I am like completely not immune to it. Like he's just such a master at this point, you know? It's like every little, there's like too much almost. There's too many little things, but you're right. It makes that it really lets you just actually experience romance without your cynical side kind of getting in the way for me. Mm-hmm. Is the like fact that you have to surrender yourself to this, you know, this basically like, you know, big velvet curtain of a movie.
Uh-oh. I apparently didn't get the memo. I knew about this movie. The fantastical elements about it, I was not fully prepared for. So the whole time I'm like, what the hell is happening right now?
Have you seen Baz Luhrmann before?
No, I did see William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet.
Excuse me, Romeo plus Juliet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. See, for me though, what's weird is that I think about that movie. I'm just like, Meg, I told you this earlier when I was talking about like my type when I was younger, and I ran away from Leonardo DiCaprio so hard right now. It was like, you know, like I was on a track star or something like that. So for me, Romeo plus Juliet is just like, hey, isn't Paul Rudd in that movie?
He is.
Yes, he is. I know he is. So that's as much as I can remember about that. And like Peter Postlethwaite is the apothecary. That's where my brain goes. So I'm sure there's merits to that particular movie. But I was okay. So in the interest of full disclosure, I used to watch a lot of online reviews of the Nostalgia Critic from Channel Awesome. And they did this very long 45-minute review in the style of a musical of Moulin Rouge. And the whole shtick of the Nostalgia Critic is that he, you know, like, oh, we watched this when we were younger, but we watch this now. It's just like, what the hell is going on right now? So I just have I only know like the absolute ridiculousness of the things, because that's what they pointed out in the review. But in rewatching it, I'm just like tearing that review apart, where I'm just like, no, it makes sense that this ridiculousnous is happening. Not like the absinthe and the fairies. No, that I understood. But like the farce that she was doing when she was dancing around and just like, woo, woo, woo. And that's what they were criticizing. And then underneath it said, as she was just like, and it's like Academy Award nominated performance. And I'm like, oh no, this is farce. And then I turned around and we were watching. I'm like, honey, I hate farce, don't I? He's like, yeah, you really do. I'm like, oh jeez.
That's hysterical. Because this like movie makes me realize that I either love movies that are completely like hyper realistic. I mean, this isn't tried and true, but like either hyper realistic or completely like a visual insane, you know, thing you could only make a movie about, you know, like that really like uses that the genre that way. And like this movie made me realize that. I was like, oh yeah. Things that are in between are the pieces that I have trouble with. Like it kind of relates a little bit to what you were saying. It's like if things are just like, I like farce because it lets you kind of suspense that you don't have to work so hard to believe what's happening.
I think this farcical nature is just very typical of Baz Luhrmann. Yeah. And I like to describe his style as sort of tonal mood swings. Like, there are such breakneck shifts in tone from pure farce and slapstick and madcap comedy to someone dying tragically of consumption. And I think that this wild switching between tones and between genres, even sometimes, that Baz Luhrmann likes to employ, I think sometimes it really works. And in my opinion, I think it works really well in Moulin Rouge. I also really like Strictly Ballroom. I think that that's a excellent Baz Luhrmann movie.
Me too.
And I actually do like Romeo and Juliet as well. But the thing is, he never really alters the style, no matter what the source or the content is. So I felt like it really, really didn't work for The Great Gatsby.
I was totally gonna say, what does this make think about The Great Gatsby? I totally agree. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It was like he was more interested in the world than the things behind the book, and so, or like what the book was sort of trying to say, or the characters. It was much more about the world. So I don't know. Yeah, I found that movie more annoying. For that reason, like,
yeah, Baz Luhrmann has this very opulent visual style, which again, I believe works in Moulin Rouge, but that was kind of all that there was to The Great Gatsby, was these beautiful costumes, these beautiful settings, fireworks, parties, and then, it didn't really speak to the content of the story very much.
Right, and actually, like, in here, it works because you can insert, like, it makes sense to insert all these musical numbers. You have all these dancers already, like, you know, and then you have this fantastical set. I don't think it works as, I agree with, like, Great Gatsby, you're like, it feels more forced, I guess. And then you're like, wait, what about that kind of interesting stuff that's actually happening underneath all these parties, which is what Great Gatsby is about, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So Meg, if I missed it, can you say it again? You saw this around high school. Did you see it in the theater?
Yes. So what you were saying about how you saw The Phantom Menace 8 times, I guess we're just trading diaries, because I also saw The Phantom Menace probably 6 to 7 times in theaters, because there just were some movies that my entire friend group really latched onto for whatever reason. So we kind of went and saw these same movies over and over together, usually with a slightly different rotation of friends. And Moulin Rouge was one of those movies as well. My friend group was as obsessed with it as I was. So I also saw it in theaters, I would say a good 6 times probably.
Oh, that's awesome. Nice. I think I'm realizing I have a sneaking suspicion that I saw it with another friend who was like, I can't believe you know, I still want to see it. And possibly with Sean, I don't know. But yeah, I definitely, like, I don't know, we can't decide if we saw this movie together, but we definitely, you know, but yeah, I had the same thing with this movie, though because I wasn't in high school, like, not as much. I feel like high school was that time. I totally relate. I know exactly what you're talking about, that there are these movies that you all had to see, and if one of you hadn't seen it,
you take them.
You take them, and then it's like, as like that rotating group. Yeah, completely.
And the movie just kind of felt like a phenomenon, both to myself and my friends, but also kind of to the world, or at least that was my impression of it. And at first, the first CD came out with all the main songs, and I bought that CD, of course. And I guess it was popular enough that they released a second volume that had full versions of all those little songs that you just hear snippets of in the movie. So I had both volumes of the CDs. I loved them. I listened to them constantly. And that Lady Marmalade song was huge at the time.
Was constantly on the radio.
And everywhere you went, like, yeah, a lot of my people had the CD, especially in the car. You'd get into, and then, you know, you'd go to restaurants and stuff, and people would, you know, would have it on. Yeah, it was kind of the soundtrack. And yeah, that song was everywhere.
I heard it on the radio not that long ago, and I thought, is it 2001 again? What's happening here?
It's a great song. Like, I love it.
But in addition to seeing it so much in theaters, I have also watched it a lot just at home. I actually almost didn't feel the need to watch it again in preparation for the podcast, just because I have seen it so much. But I've watched it so many times because I love it. So, of course, this was the perfect excuse to watch the movie yet again.
Very nice.
How was it rewatching?
It still really holds up for me. I still really love it. There's some things about the Satine character that I don't like as much upon rewatching it. Again, it's probably been a few years since I watched it last time, but I love Nicole Kidman. I love her performance. I think it held up pretty well. There's also some instances, though, of I think kind of bad ADR. Just you really notice that the audio is not synced with the lip movements, and it just kind of grated on me this time for some reason. I don't know.
Interesting.
It's fine.
I think I didn't notice that as much.
I think I did notice it, and I was worried there was something wrong with my TV.
No, I think it's just not great ADR, unfortunately.
Oh, that's okay. Was it when she was doing the woo? Because that doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I think that video was a little bit sped up, perhaps, so I didn't expect the sounds to necessarily track entirely, but...
So you're saying that there's some things about Satine that that bothered you. What was it?
Well,
or that just you noticed?
Yeah, she's really, when you look at it, the typical damsel in distress character.
Mm-hmm.
She's in need of saving. It wasn't until Christian came into her life that she really even questioned her life, I guess. I mean, there is some reflection in her song. You get the idea that she's not fully satisfied with her life. She wants to be an actress. She does have goals, but at the same time, she just seems like a pretty passive character overall. A lot of things happen to her, but she doesn't proactively do many things. But I don't think she's fully a damsel in distress. I still think she's a good character. I still love her, but there were just some aspects to it that I felt were maybe a little bit more shallow than I had noticed before.
Important question. How old do you think that Satine and Christian are approximately?
You know, I actually meant to look up how old the actors were when they filmed this, because that might inform this question. But if I had to guess, I'd say early 20s is the ages they're supposed to be.
Okay, that makes sense. So, and if I had to, think back to my Ewan McGregor obsessiveness, they were probably like mid 30s when they're like the actors.
Probably.
Okay, so that to me, it's like they feel like mid 30s, but he just left his father's home, but this is, the end of the 1800s Paris. So what does that mean for people? Does that mean 20? Does that mean 12? I don't know how Paris works, but
Ewan McGregor was 30 when when this movie came out. So he was in his very late 20s. Thank God the math was easy, that he was born in 1971.
Hey, helpful. Oh, wow. Baby Ewan McGregor.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
Yeah. Well, so you sorry, you were just saying about how old, because it was interesting. Like, yeah, I assumed early 20s, but I loved that whole thing when he began. And he basically is like, I believe in all of these things. I believe in truth. I believe in beauty. I believe in freedom. And I believe in love. But the problem was, so I came to write about love. But the problem was that I've never been in love.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you were saying that you're like, I'm the Ewan McGregor. Is it like, when I saw that bit, I was really like, oh God, I remember being really young and believing in all of these things that I had no idea what they actually were. There were these ideas. I mean, if you take like love as a, especially, we're all have been in long-term relationships. People we're living with, like, is a very active act, at some point in your life. It's not an idea. And it was like interesting to go back to that time where it's an idea, it's a desire, and you have no idea what it actually is like.
I think, again, what I was saying before about how this movie came to me at the exact right time. I totally agree with what you're saying. If I had had experience in romantic relationships before seeing this movie, it definitely would have hit different. And I do
Mhm.
think that the Christian character is very naive. He has this idealized idea of romance, and for a while in the movie it is just his idea of romance and before
Mhm.
it's an actual relationship. And the love story is just really simple. Every
Right.
single threat to the relationship is external. There's the
Mhm.
Duke, there's Zidler, there's the illness, but their love is pure and simple and cut and dry. This movie is not your marriage story, let's
No,
say.
no. No, and but actually, like when I saw it, and again, like, you know, seeing it, like, it's like it's like an 18-year-old and a 28-year-old, right? It's like I had experience at that point,
Mhm.
and I do think I think that I definitely think that if I saw this movie, you know, at like the time you guys saw the movie, I would have watched it 50,000 times. Like I would have had the same exact reaction, same thing. I still I think at that point and even now, it's like, I mean, now I guess I'm a little more cynical about it, but like the love story, you're right, is incredibly simple, but actually that is its um I was super super struck by it and super like even then was super I guess transported by it. Like it just, yeah, their love, like, and it's going to end, how it ends, and so in a weird way maybe there's like a relaxing of, you know, I don't have to think about if this relationship is, going to make sense, if like they're compatible. I don't need to think about whether or not they're going to, um, like if they're going to live in this uncomfortable apartment and he's going to be, it's like he doesn't have an income. She doesn't, it's like, and she's losing a portion of her income. Maybe she's going to gain it, but like, you know, how are they going to deal with the fact that her career is probably going to be much more powerful than his, though who knows, is successful. But, like I don't have to think about those things, and I didn't have to think of them at 28. I could just be like everything that happens to these people is a gift, right? They're snatching life from the jaws of death,
Except for death happened. Sorry.
No, but like that they're going to die, so you have the sense of like every single or one of them is going to die, that they're like death is coming, and they're snatching every bit of life until that death comes.
Mm-hmm.
So and I remember, like, my husband said, he's like, why did they give it away at the beginning? And I was like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot about that. And then I was like, oh, actually that's like kind of genius.
Actually, it's kind of an interesting flavor for 2001, because this was, nominated for, I want to say, Best Picture, up against another movie where you also find out the main character is dead from the beginning and talking from the afterlife, American Beauty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember watching that Academy Award. That was totally, that's when I was into Academy Awards. That was nice. Cool. That was fun.
Yeah, it was interesting. Maybe it was just a thing that they all decided to jump on, like the two volcano movies that came out at the same time.
Yeah, there's something in the air. Yeah. So I kind of I get that, and even just now rewatching it, I totally I remember like this plot device of having Toulouse-Lautrec. As like as a character, is, and knowing was kind of like felt a little shoehorned, but I never really noticed him, even though I thought like I love John Leguizamo, but like you realize that he's just seeing him and you realize he's in love with Christian. It's like, and that's like that he's sort of like lonely in his own right. I kind of forgot about him as like sort of a character of both with a lot of pathos. And I just like, I thought he really kind of, you know, strode that line pretty well because it just sprinkled a little bit throughout.
Yeah, he's kind of the secondary narrator in a way. He at least bookends the movie. So yeah, he's actually a pretty important character.
Right. He like, yeah, because he kicks off everything in the beginning. And he sort of saves the lovers at the end. Or at least from one kind of death.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he's the catalyst. This whole let's get this whatever it is that they're writing. Are they writing a musical or a play or just any type of
spectacular?
Yeah, spectacle. So so Baz Luhrmann was really inspired by Bollywood for this, right? And I can, like this. Yeah, the fantastical, the fantastical elements of it. It seems like a play. Like, I also like. There's something really fantastic about the let's put on a show genre, like because it's literally nothing. Like it's like all the fun stuff about putting on a show and none of the pain, or very little of the pain, except for the death. I mean, I guess that is pain.
Yeah, it all comes together very seamlessly.
Right. Yeah. Very little action. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled that, upon rewatch, Meg, that it's still strong for you. I always have these gigantic concerns about rewatching stuff from, almost 20 years ago or a big chunk of time. And it's just like, oh, this does not hold up. And now I have to explain myself. And that's hard.
Or this is a movie of absolute horror and people who are terrible to each other. Like, why did I think this was a love story again? What is wrong with me? That's like often how I feel as well. Like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
No, it fortunately held up pretty well for me, but it's also a movie that I watch pretty regularly, probably every couple of years or so. So I guess I've just kind of grown up along with it.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Oh, that's still kind of weird though. It's just like not Dorian Gray type thing, but no. Matthew McConaughey and Days Confused. I keep getting older and they keep staying the same age. Although that's
except I'm not creeping on high school girls in this instance.
Yeah, that's gross.
To state. Well, what about you? So you saw it. You said that you saw it as a teenager and then rewatching as an adult. Like, how was the, like, how did that love story sort of work or not work
this
for you?
This is your first time watching it, isn't it, Diana?
Yeah, this is my first time.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought like during your friend's McGregor season, the season of the McGregor.
Oh no. See, by then Moulin Rouge wasn't there, and it was kind of just happenstance. No, actually, no, I take that back. No, we hit a whole bunch of other different movies instead. A lot of them were, like I said, they were bootlegs. I mean, the statute of limitations on buying bootlegs is over after a bunch of years, right? I'm safe.
Totally. Yeah, no, I don't think they're going to come after you. Okay,
that's good. Yeah, like I said, it just any movies that we could get our hand on. But by the time Moulin Rouge rolled around, wasn't going to see it.
It was your post McGregor time.
So what do you think of it for the first time? You are not a musical person in general.
I'm not a musical person. And what's weird is that, because we watched Guys and Dolls and that was just a flat out like musical. You have two spectacles and it was interesting because they're both, pretty spectacle-y, but in completely different ways. So this one, I was kind of concerned about like, when it first got started, it was just very like flashy. And I'm like, oh no, I hope this doesn't give me a headache because Ryan knows that quick cuts, like watching The Bourne Identity. I'm just like,
oh my God. I was actually thinking about that when I saw it because I remember that from seeing it, when we're like kind of, we're like sitting super close to it, really drunk and like, not really drunk, but a little drunk. And I wasn't like, but it was like, I was like, I feel really dizzy. Like I suddenly felt much drunker than I was because it was like very dizzying. But watching it this time, because I was prepared. I was like, oh God, this is going to be overwhelming. But then I had this thought where I was like, oh God, I wonder if like Diana's going to get a headache because it's really like, it's insane.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, It's like when you're like being spun around when you're dancing, especially when you were like a kid and people would like spin you around, as like on the dance floor and like weddings and parties, and it was like too fast. It like felt like that. It's like at some point they're gonna let go and I'm gonna lose control. Like it's just yeah.
I do think that's very intentional though. So
Totally.
there's at least that. Good job,
Yeah.
Baz Luhrmann,
Yeah,
on
no,
making
he
this
really-
dizzying, crazy, magical place that Christian
Right.
suddenly finds himself in.
But it's
Yeah.
fun when you get to like watch it again and you can break down kind of what happens a little bit and you see
Mhm.
how genius the intentionality of it is. But
Well,
that's like a rewatch thing. I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, that does come into play. But I will be honest. The first 15 minutes of the movie, it turns out our sound settings were not appropriately set up. So we had it on surround sound with no surround sound equipment, so we couldn't understand why we couldn't hear Jim Broadbent at all. So
Oh yeah, I've done that before.
yeah, so I'm just like, okay, lots of stuff's happening, and Ryan's like, there's something wrong with the sound. I'm like, I'm wondering if this is just an effect of how crazy everything is. He's like, no, there's something wrong with the sound. Hang on. I'm like, oh crap. Okay, back it up. So
So you got to rewatch that part.
yeah. So I kind of got a tiny rewatch with the first 15 minutes or so, but it was visually stunning, but at the same time though, I'm trying so hard to understand it, whereas I didn't walk in with a sense of, again, I didn't get the memo with the whole like the magicalness of it, the open-mindedness of just how basic the love is and just how intense it is so quickly. And so I was just like more focusing on like, what's up with the singing moon? What is that? Do you the moon has a mustache?
It's surrealist.
I didn't get the memo. So it was definitely interesting. I'm glad I got to, see what was happening for realsies instead of just like having like an inkling of what was going on. I do have one opinion though that I definitely want to share. Apologies in advance to you two who just love their love story, but with everything that was happening, especially with the Duke and, she's my property and, he basically getting stuck into some sort of financial crisis where the Moulin Rouge is now up as collateral to guarantee that Satine will marry the Duke. And when she goes that night, and the entire theater troupe has just accepted, yeah, it's like she's going to her execution because they know she's about to go sleep with the Duke for the first time to solidify that he'll finance this thing. And I think like all of the men who are using Satine, including the Duke, including, what is Jim Broadbent's character's name again?
Zidler.
Zidler, thank you. Okay. Because she is the means of, the Duke wants her, she works for him. And Christian to a certain extent too, it's like you are the embodiment of this thing that I need to understand. So I get jealous. And of course the jealousy is just a way for drama to happen in the story. So
also
that's
makes sense. I mean, you're like, this is your first love and
Right, exactly. So if anything, I want to give a shout out to the member of the dance troupe that actually showed up and rescued Satine.
Yeah.
Twice.
Oh my God,
yeah.
Twice. Because everyone's just like, oh yeah, I guess, well, this is just what's going to happen. And like the first time she faints because of her illness, he's the one who catches her and brings her in and tries to make sure. And then he goes after her. Clearly he went after her before things turned sour. So he is the only hero of this movie in the male.
You know what? I was thinking about that too, because upon this watch, I thought, well, it really should have been Christian who shows up and punches the Duke, right?
Yes.
And
like, that's so weird.
For sure. So it's strange because it does make Chocolat, I believe is his name. It does make him far more heroic than Christian, especially in that scene. The only explanation that I could kind of square with this is that it's almost Christian's journey, besides falling in love, to trust Satine and to get over his jealousy, or at least accept his jealousy. So there's so much jealousy throughout the movie. They sing about it. And she pretty much says, I'm doing this for the sake of our relationship. You have to trust us. And the best I could think was, if Christian had shown up and punched the Duke, that would have ultimately been him not trusting in Satine. of course he didn't know they would have saved her from rape because that's how it played out. But
Sure.
if she had entered somewhat consensually into having sex with the Duke, it would have been Christian unable to overcome his jealousy. Although, can it really be that consensual when it's like, it's almost blackmail, sleep
Right.
with me or else type of thing.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
had a moment too where I actually, when they were like, let's run away, that I was like, well, wait. I mean, first off, like, really, it's pretty shitty for Zidler to, like, basically not, to basically give away the Moulin Rouge to, which is a workplace, let's not forget, to like on basically this woman's body, right? Like without talking to her about it, without like just assuming that like this is and granted, like this whole idea that it's like then it becomes respect, then becomes a dream and everyone gets it. But I did have a moment when the lovers were like, we're gonna go away. I was like, guys, you have like a responsibility. People have been working so hard to like get this musical going, and like I assume the woman who actually ends up like in the scene that Diana was referring to ends up being the love, like kind of playing the Sabine character, or just like the eternal, it's like to print to Sting's Roxanne, or the police's Roxanne, which I think Sting wrote, I can't remember, and like that classic, I'm in love with a whore kind of genre of songs, and so I don't know, that part, like I just had that's like kind of got me out. I was like those people have been working very hard and now they don't have like employment, and like I assume that woman maybe have been the understudy, and that's literally how like I could get out of my head and stop thinking, was like, oh, but she has an understudy. Like, yeah, I'm sure the understudy is going to be very happy, and it could be that the understudy then, and I had to do this like thing, because I was like, your love is more important than like you've known each other for like 2 weeks, and your love is over. And then I remembered he was a stage manager, and I'm like, oh, I'm just like remembering the like when two actors are like fell in love and were like the most annoying people, and I was especially if you're an assistant stage manager, you're always the one who has to like go find them and like have, like be like, guys, can you just get your tongues out of each other's mouths and like come back to work?
So at the very least, so for a while, I was really irritated because I'm just like, wow, you're not even hiding it all that well. But again, they're young, so they're not really like smart about this kind of thing. So I'll give them a pass there. But in all fairness, Polina, if you're going to play the whole like, oh my God, they're young, what about the rest of these people? I'm like, I'm going to go and also bring up the fact that everyone knew she was dying and no one told her.
Okay. Yeah. What is that all about?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. Like, it's a plot device, right? But, like, I don't know. And they didn't tell her because they're like, oh, well, but this, it's her last few minutes of happiness. Or, it's not like she was about to go, and finally see Italy. And they're like, I don't want to tell her because she won't go. It's like, well, we don't want to tell her because we want the show to go on, which I think I'm going to say is probably on purpose, because there is a sinister, dark, I think there is a sinister dark side to, this movie that they talk about, right? Like,
yeah, I have to say that all of these points that you guys have just brought up really speak to one central thing that I don't like about this movie. It's probably my biggest gripe about the movie. Them not telling Satine that she's dying, Satine not really having any say in the terms of the Moulin Rouge contract, and the fact that Satine hides from Christian that there's a threat against his life from the Duke. All of these are instances of people withholding information, which kind of withholds consent and also gets rid of autonomy. It's all just like unacceptable. And I really didn't like, I had an opposite reaction about whether to run away or whether to stay and see the performance through to the end. Because when it's revealed to Satine that she's dying, in my opinion, I think that would have just further propelled her to run away.
Right, because she's like, I don't have time left. Like, I need, because I thought that too. I was having like a lot of struggle with that because I was like, that to me is the greatest like crisis of them not running away together, is that like she has so little time left and she has to waste it with the Duke.
Exactly. And if she has so little time left, what's the point of doing the performance? Because the whole reason she wants to do the performance is to give her a bigger literal and figurative stage for her to become an actress. But once she knows that that's not in the cards for her anymore, you would think that she would say, okay, I'm going to run away with Christian. And this is a very common trope in romances where there's a secret and one partner doesn't tell the other. And in this case, it's the illness and the Duke wanting to kill Christian. And I just hate that they just don't talk to each other. Of course, we wouldn't have the drama in the end if Satine had just straight up been like, hey, I'm dying and the Duke wants to kill you. Because then obviously Christian would be like, okay, let's run away literally right this second. So it's very aggravating when one partner removes even the option of choice or knowledge from their other so-called partner.
It is really frustrating. I agree. It's like, and I think as you get older, it's harder. Like I find that to be the theme through sort of rewatching these movies. I'm like, if you guys had just talked to each other, though I remember when I was a teenager and the first couple, like, a sort of either crushes, like really intense crushes, and even relationships, talking to that person was really scary. But yeah, but it's like, you're like, this could be solved by like a really simple, very simple conversation.
And it's
like
literal life and death.
Very simple.
Literal life and death.
Yeah, like not like a difficult, like a complicated conversation, but literally an exchange of nouns. Like nouns, verbs, and adverbs. Like a simple statement of fact would have really helped. Like it's not a like challenging, complicated, emotional conversation where you have to like think about how you're feeling and how it affects the other person. It's literally like, you are dying of consumption and this man is going to kill you. Like, not a complicated, like, a conversation you need to have with a therapist present. Like, just a couple sentences will do you.
Well, I'm actually thinking about that right now, and I'm just thinking, yeah, it totally makes sense. 37-year-old me saying that,
right.
But I'm just like, you know what? If you inject me with the same hormones that I had when I was that age, I would just be like, I gotta go.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Like sometimes I had that moment of remembering, and especially while you guys are like remember, when you're talking about watching this movie, and that some of the stuff you're talking about is like, oh yeah, God, it really like it was I kind of all these sense memories of those feelings,
Yeah. Plus some of the stuff that she was saying in the beginning when she was lying to Christian about security and having the money. Like, so when the Duke says it, he's an asshole. But when she says it, I'm just like, no, she's not wrong.
Well, that's the other thing. I'm like, yeah, she's not wrong. Like she is what she thinks, but it's kind of like, well, her numbers. That's why it would be so helpful if she knew that her number was up.
Maybe.
Like was coming up,
I will say it didn't ruin the experience for me, but it is uncomfortable watching somebody do horrific coughing right in everyone's faces during the movie, and I'm like, oh, too real.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that
not
was
a good time for that.
That's like because actually, so Sean sat down and to watch the movie, and he's like, oh, I'm just gonna watch like the first 5 minutes, and then 2 hours later he's like sitting there, and he was like, when he got to the coughing, he's like, oh, this is like, do you guys remember this when you chose to watch this? I'm like, no, not really. But yeah, it really definitely is. Things look a little different when you see people coughing up blood right now.
Yeah. Oh, and also I will say at that scene where, Satine is singing the song to Christian to have him come back. When he gets on the stage, I actually saw a burst of spit come out of him onto her, and I'm like,
I did too.
I'm like, oh, okay.
Droplets.
Well, yeah, there were droplets. Not great.
Yeah, I also, I mean, I know that consumption is caused by bacteria, and obviously COVID is caused by virus. But it also, like, I just want to say that, like, so when her, like the actually I think she is like stage manager, the costume mistress or stage manager was yeah, I guess she would have been the costume mistress, like, discovers, you know, like when she faints and like kind of helps her out. She had this look on her face when she realized she sees like the blood. This is the first time Satine faints and she sees the blood. A look on her face is that of alarm, and I realized that I read it as, oh my God, we're all screwed. Like, you're going to get consumption, I'm going to get consumption. Like, you have consumption, that means I'm going to get consumption. That means half this cast is going to get consumption. And, like, I don't know how, I mean, I know it was, like, tuberculosis was a huge issue, but, like, but I don't know how contagious it was. I mean, it was like another outbreak. It was like
it was very contagious.
Yeah, very contagious.
It was very
they just
contagious,
kind of gloss over that in this movie. They're like, just never mind. She's sick, and it's not harming anyone else? Question mark.
Plus, she looks fantastic.
Right, and they all know it, and they're all like, I mean, they're all interacting with her. It's like yeah, they don't cover the fact that he's probably going to get it. I mean, that was my
spoiler alert. This might play into my what happens after the movie ends.
Oh.
Stop reading the rest of my notes, Meg. Well, then, how about this then? We all have consumption now, and in order to wish
that upon me.
Oh, it was not a wish. It was the reality of the spit that was being shot out from this movie.
I mean, if the price to pay is consumption for Ewan McGregor to sing in my face, I don't know. I'd have to have a long, hard think about it.
Is this like a quarantine wish, your top 5 quarantine partners type of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, 2 weeks.
He definitely. That would be okay. I think I would have to weigh it pretty heavily.
Well, then, how about this then? Meg, I will give you the honors of potentially going first. You're allowed to decline. It's an honor, but at the same time, it's not going to be foisted upon you. Considering how much you have watched this movie, I'm sure you have like a time stamp of when they fell in love. But if you want to speak to the actual moment itself rather than the timestamp, please go.
Sure. So I know that sometimes on your podcast, you even pose the question of, did they even fall in love? And I think in this movie, you absolutely have to answer, yes, of course they fell in love. Otherwise, this will probably not be an enjoyable movie for you. And as I was saying before, Moulin Rouge is very fantastical. And I think that it is within the realm of the world of this movie to say that Christian fell in love at first sight. He is spellbound from the moment he sees Satine. He's just kind of in awe. And the first scene where they're really alone together in the elephant, he can barely speak. He then serenades her with Your Song. And I think that it's not long afterwards that Satine falls in love with Christian. Once he finishes Your Song, she says, I can't believe it. I'm in love with a duke, a talented, handsome duke. And that's when he says, I'm not a duke, I'm a writer. And she's like, a writer, and is all surprised and pushes him away. So at first I kind of thought, well, was it an act, her saying, I can't believe I'm in love with you? But I think that, and she even tries to play it off this way. When he asks her later, he says, were you just saying that? And she says, oh, of course I was just saying that. I'm a courtesan. I make men believe what they want to believe. But I don't think that's the truth. I think she really did fall in love with him in that moment, because he finishes singing Your Song. He dips her. She says she's in love. And then the Duke interrupts. And in an effort to allow Christian to escape the room, she starts echoing some of the song lyrics Christian had just sung of how wonderful life is. Now you're in the world. And right when she says, now you're, she looks directly and deeply into Christian's eyes when she says it. And it's just her.
Which is quite dangerous.
Yeah. And it's her communicating with him literally right under the Duke's nose that, yes, suddenly life does seem wonderful now that she's met Christian. And unintentionally, she entirely woos the Duke in that moment as well. He gets literal twinkly eyes and little sparkles in his eyes. And then, of course, we have my favorite scene, which is the elephant love medley. And again, it starts out with him saying, "Do you really love me?" She says no. She protests. But it all seems very perfunctory when she's just like, no, 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 we can't be together. I don't love you. She does love him. She does want to be together. It's just that she's the pragmatist of the couple, and she needs to be convinced. She needs to be allowed to give in to the feelings she's already feeling. So they're absolutely in love by the time the elephant love medley comes in, but I would say they were in love even before that.
So nice. Even think like maybe when they were dancing together
in the Moulin Rouge?
Yeah.
I don't think Satine loved him at that point. I think she was like, here's my mark. Oh, I'm so lucky that this Duke guy I have to woo is handsome. I don't think she loved him at that point. But when he was singing Your Song, I do think that she fell for him in that moment.
Very nice. Which is a shame, because if it wasn't for that stupid twirly mustache and bad haircut, Richard Roxburgh is a attractive
seriously
guy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, he is so good in this role too. He's hilarious. He is such a buffoon. He's so good. Such a good role as the Duke.
And he's so he's like greasy, and because he's like a super attractive man, and but he's so like unctuous and weird and
unctuous, that's a good
kind of gross, he's like kind of slimy and a little lizard-like.
And I don't even know if this makes sense, but even like his teeth played the part as well. Just the way he just had that weird grin the whole time.
Exactly. It's like
he's very squirrely.
Yeah.
Weasley, maybe.
Yeah, Weasley.
That's a better animal.
How about him? When did he fall in love with?
Oh, I don't think he loved Satine. I think he just had this sense of ownership and possession.
No, I don't. Sorry.
The Duke?
Yeah. No, not the Duke, but Christian. Do you think, when did he fall in love with?
Oh, I think it was love at first sight for Christian. Yeah, I think from the moment he saw her. Cool. He was totally tongue-tied when he saw her one-on-one in the elephant. It might have just been the lingerie, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and here's something. I don't know if I missed it, but as someone who has watched it as many times as you had, before meeting in the elephant, did she get into this incredible red gown?
She did.
Corseted up just so she could change out of it in front of him?
I really don't know. But yes, she is being corseted into that beautiful red dress. And then in the next scene, she's in the lacy black lingerie. So I'm not entirely sure how that happens, but you are right.
Potential musical number that got cut out.
Oh, so the dress, she was wearing lingerie, and then when they have the like elephant love scene or like elephant love song as you referred to it, like when they're outside, she's wearing like the dress version of the lingerie she was wearing, because like it's much more buttoned up, but it's like the same kind of thing. So I just was like, oh wait. You never saw her change, obviously. She's still in the lingerie that she was wearing, but now she's suddenly wearing the dress. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of like sneaky costume changes.
What do you think, Paulina?
I think I agree with the Satine timeline. Though I think that because I think that the song is like when they're together, I think it's the first time that somebody, I think, has really looked at her, and not just what they can provide for, not just like what they can provide, what she can provide for them, but like actually is one, genuinely themselves around her, and then also kind of really I think she feels seen in a weird way. Like she's suddenly out of her kind of cynical world and into his, like, nothing bad has happened to him yet, right? He hasn't, even like, I mean, I know he has a difficult relationship with his father, but like, I mean, come on. That's like pretty common. But he's come to Paris, and like 24 hours later, he's a part of this entire world, and he's wearing a top, you know what I mean? Like, so his world is a world where anything can happen, and her world is a world where there's all this calculation to make everything that you want happen. So he's created this space in singing and creating that song where the world is pure and hopeful and uncomplicated. And I think that's when she falls in love with him.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But like she was saying to Zidler at one point, she said that Zidler had led her to believe that she was only worth whatever someone was willing to pay for her. So I think that's a good point that you bring up, that for once in her life, it's apparent to her that Christian just loves her. And even though he does, essentially try to convince her through song to sleep with him for free, it's still pretty apparent that he loves her for her and not just what he can get from her.
Right. Like, yeah, I think like even, when he's dancing with her, he's not like, it's, it's almost like, when they're in the room, they're literally experiencing two different things, because she's experiencing one, like, she thinks she's here to seduce the Duke into giving the money. And she's like, I know how to do this. And he thinks he's there as an audition. So it's like such a different mindset. And so I thought that was a really interesting way to play it, because basically in her world, in her like moment, in her world, this Duke has all the power, right? So in her version of what's happening, this is the person with the power to give her what he wants. In his version, even if you take out the love part, this person has the power to give him what he wants. Mm-hmm. Not just love, but like a livelihood and a way of being a writer and friends and the actual bohemian life that he came to Paris to experience. Mm-hmm. I think he falls in love with her. I think there's definitely a love at first sight, but I think in a lot of these kind of movies and love at first sight, there's kind of these phases of love. And I think that phase where it goes just from, oh my God, this woman is so beautiful, to like, is that she is his muse. Mm. Right? Because he's like, he's never written a song until he writes, ironically, The Sound of Music. And not ironically, but just like, it's a really interesting juxtaposition. Like T-Rex and, God, I just forgot. I think it's Laura who like wrote Sound of Music. And and so, but I think that's when he falls in love, is like, he realizes suddenly all of the stuff that he's written about, he's feeling, and it's driving his writing. And this is he's like, oh, I recognize this. This is how I expected to feel. This is what it is. This is the thing I've been reading about. And it does do this thing. It does give you the desire to write. And suddenly, all these thoughts just pop into his head. And you realize like that there's that lovely thing of, when you're like, sometimes like the song thing, I felt a little weird, because it's like modern songs, or not even modern really, I guess, but different. There's like a pastiche, it's like, as you said, a jukebox musical, Diana. It's kind of an interesting take on a jukebox musical, and like, it's weird when you hear that song, that Elton John song, but the one piece that it does make you realize that the key lyric is, now you're in the world. Like, it's such a beautiful, because it's like, well, obviously this person has been in the world. They're 20 something years old, right? They've been in the world for 20 something years, but it's like, suddenly the world is your world, like your world together.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly it's much bigger. And that was kind of a nice thing. Like it took me out of the slight cheesiness of picking that song.
Mm. Very nice.
Anyway, that's what I think. That's when he fell in love. And I do think she kind of really realizes she's deeply in love with him when she's like, I'm actually keeping him from being killed is the driving force of like all of her actions. She's willing to do almost anything to stop that from happening, even and especially, sacrifice her own life. And I mean, her own experiences and her own agency just to keep him from getting killed, right? Because I think, the Duke realizes, oh, okay, it's not enough anymore to just say, I'm pulling the money. I have to raise the stakes. And the stakes that he raises them to is to kill the love of her life.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Heavy. Ooh. Okay.
What about you, Diana?
Well, after I yelled at you for looking at my notes, I realized for me, it's so interesting what you had pointed out where, her role is to convince men to believe whatever it is that they are paying her to get them to believe, which is its own strange thing. But, when she said, I can't believe I'm in love with the Duke, I actually consider that to be an admission while simultaneously being absolutely incredulous that a poet, while simultaneously being filthy rich and the answer to her prayers, I think she absolutely could not believe that something so amazing there all just kind of came into play. But I think that she fell in love with that poet, but she exclaimed all of it in the package is what she said. And when she found out that he wasn't, that's when she's just like, nope, that wasn't there. So if you want to talk about like phases or layers, I mean, she fell in love with this perfection of everything coming together. But when that was taken away, it was just like panic. Especially when everything was just like, the Duke is actually here. You got to hide this guy because that would be the end of everything. Not just, because I could make the argument that she was in love with him and she tried to get him out because that would save him because this guy was probably going to get seriously beaten up considering this Duke has been known to carry not a hitman, but like a hired thug to do his angry bidding.
Angry bidding. I love the term angry bidding.
Yeah.
Best sentence.
Yeah, but I could also argue that was just her own preservation because if she's just going to get implicated too. It's like, right. What were you doing with him? What is this? But if I think it's in the process of this writing this thing together and being more and more irresponsible of them together. So I think it happened in the writing of the play and the tiny adjustments and the story coming together. And it could even be in the piece of trying to explain to him what it's about in the first place. It's about this, it's about this, it's about this. And that's them coming together because not only have they expressed something together, but they're driving together in order to maintain this illusion to keep them both safe while kind of pushing for these little things like it's about love and it's about this sitar player who does this thing and she chimes in and he chimes in and then they all come together.
They have a project together. Yeah. Oh, I didn't even think about that. That is really beautiful.
Yeah. So I think coming together and then also just, it's they're singing it together and it's, supposed to be interesting, but it's also just an opportunity for them to come together. So that way, when they separate and he comes to see her again privately, she's like, no, I was just telling you what you wanted to hear. And he's just really into her as well. She actually has something real to kind of deny. And I think it's them working together for the good of everyone involved is their phase of real love together, not just the blurting out of things.
Oh, that's so
Very
great.
nice.
Oh, that's so nice. I didn't think of it that way, that this play is their like project together? Because when I was watching them do the play, I was thinking, told you what I was thinking about, but then about like, actors but like it also reminded me of that phase of your life where you cannot keep your hands off of somebody. It's like there's no way that you can't. It's like impossible. It's not that phase in the relationship where you're like, I don't care. The being caught is less real than the desire for this person.
They need to learn discipline. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, fair.
Your guys' answers were much more thoughtful. I'm just like, oh, they fell in love instantly.
No,
I believe it too. To be honest, it's just, I imagine, again, you have the years of just like, this is, and it's truthful and it's what they say and you believe them. And I'm like, yeah, I believe them too, but I'm also older and I'm not attached to them. So I have to think about this for a minute. My cynical view says, no, it was 2 minutes later, Meg, 2 minutes later.
Oh, yes. Very important 2 minutes.
I think that one of the problems, not the problem, like I notice this when there's like more than when we have guest singular or guest plural. It's like, usually guest goes and it's like, I have a pretty basic concept of like, how they fell in love. And then when I start the thing and then, I'll like, it's sort of like I'm building on the theme that you just like said. So it's like the person who goes first is sort of like, it's like, that's the disadvantage is it's like, oh, wait, I hadn't thought of it that way. That makes me also think of X, so. But I thought yours was really beautiful too. But
not to mention,
that's awesome.
Not to mention a convincing love at first sight is pretty damn powerful. So if it's there and it's something that you can witness and be on board for, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. Because if that's like, as we were talking about, not easy, we mentioned, like, what Meg mentioned earlier, it's like, yeah, it's hard to break through, one's sort of cynical heart and to be like, yes, love is love. Love is its own value.
Yeah, I almost have to believe it has to be love at first sight and this sort of magical connection in this movie, because otherwise you ask yourself, well, what did Christian like about Satine? And it's like that she's beautiful. Like he literally knows nothing of her personality. And, switch that around. What does Satine like about Christian? That he's very handsome. So it can be very cynical. So that's why I feel like I have to buy into the love at first sight idea, and not just that they loved each other's looks, but that there was something that they were drawn to about the other.
Well, also, each other is extremely talented. I mean, yes, she's incredibly beautiful, but she's an amazing singer, an amazing actress, like an amazing world builder, like she has this, she's like super, she's incredibly talented, right? And so, and they're, as Diana pointed out, like they are working on a project together, right? They're creative.
That's why I like that approach, is because then they actually get to see something of each other's personalities.
Exactly.
Because then they know that Satine is willing to risk some of herself by trying to hide Christian from the Duke, and she covers for him. And then when all the rest of Toulouse-Lautrec and the troupe comes in and everyone's covering for each other, then that's when they actually get to see each other's personalities a little bit. So yeah, I do like that idea.
Yeah, that's true. That's really interesting. There's more to it. Because I agree, yeah. And I kind of feel like better about buying the love story now. I'm like, oh, there's actually something there.
No, there's totally something there. I mean, this wouldn't have captured the imaginations of, millions of people all flocking to the theater to see it and then watching it over and over again. If it was just like, I mean, it's no Mannequin, Meg, but I guess it's a fine movie, whatever. I guess I should just be upset because Mannequin didn't have an exclamation point in it. So
yeah, there's I mean, Mannequin does have one of the best mall montages ever created by anyone, and I feel like it should be given its due. It should be given its due in the pantheon for that reason alone.
I mean, I will say that both movies did want to be part of some beautiful, spectacular lip syncing / clothes montage type of scenario. So
completely,
I don't know. This is not the How is Moulin Rouge and Mannequin the Same Movie podcast, but let's consider it for later.
It makes you want to go shopping, and it makes you want to dress up in uncomfortable clothing. I feel that's which frankly these days is like. That's the magic right there. It's, like wanting to put on uncomfortable clothes right now is like, it's a difficult place to remember that, at some point you're like, I want to wear that dress. I want to look like that,
Polina, earlier you said that the downside or possible consequences of having a guest is they may introduce something that you yourself wanted to introduce, and then it's just like, oh, it just makes you think, crap, okay, well now I have to kind of think about it a little bit more. So at the risk of doing that, Meg, you want to share what you think happens next?
Sure, and at the risk of seeming to have a not very thorough approach to this question, I will go first. So
blow it up.
I alluded to what my answer for this was earlier. So unfortunately, we know from the get-go what happens to poor Satine. She does not survive through the end of this movie. And as much as I really want to believe in a better, happier future for Christian, I just don't think that that is what's in store for this character. He's sort of the quintessential tortured writer. And again, I feel like with this movie, you just have to buy into the whole premise. And the premise for me is that Christian and Satine shared this one pure, brief but beautiful love. And even though I don't necessarily think in real life that there's only one person for every single person, I think that's a little bit cynical when it comes to real life. But in a movie, it's kind of beautiful. And I really don't think there's anyone else for Christian but Satine. So when we start the movie, it's been about a year since Satine's death. He's been mourning her for a year, and then he starts to write their story. This was Satine's, these were her final moments. She said, "Promise me that you'll tell our story." And it's almost like Christian is this walking ghost in a way. He has this unfinished business in the world, which is that he has to tell their story because he promised Satine, the love of his life, that he would do so. And once he finishes writing the story, I almost feel as though he's been released in a way. And I think that this couple is very Shakespearean. I think it's the tragic couple. And I think the sort of poetic ending for him would be for him to die of consumption as well. That their love was ultimately not both of their deaths, but ultimately his death, his loving her, is also what brings him to die eventually. And I'm no doctor, but I did some brief research on tuberculosis, and apparently it can take years to manifest or to become active. So it's actually believable that he could have contracted consumption from Satine, but then not die from it until years later. So unfortunately, I think that is what happens to poor Christian. But in this fantastical world, I also like to believe that they will be reunited and, dancing among the clouds and the Eiffel Tower and the singing moon.
So he appears on the boat and they all start clapping around him. Oh wait, different movie. Different movie. Oops, sorry.
Yes.
Man, it's funny. You alluded earlier that you're like, oh, it's gonna get dark, but actually I'm like, oh, mine's more depressing. So you kind of, yeah. So I don't know. I'm just really like, I kind of went into this. I have to admit that I kind of did that, like, complete, like, mess up of dates in my head thing. So I actually ended up watching this pretty close to taping. Like I was originally like, oh, I thought we were taping the next day, and I'm like, that'll be my Saturday night, like Moulin Rouge, you know, a bunch of wine, like we're gonna watch this movie, and then, and then I was like, oh, I just mixed up Saturday and Sunday. And so, but luckily I discovered this in like perfect time, and I got to really enjoy the movie without a rush. And, but because of that, I couldn't really reconcile these two worlds. I mean, one of them was actually quite close to your vision. I mean, because I think yours makes sense because, of course, all you see is like liquor bottles all around him, and he's like crusty plates. So like, he's obviously like, it's like the little I remember about tuberculosis is that like, you know, it's definitely, you know, one of those like many diseases that affect your lungs is like, if your immune system is weak, and if you're, you know, drinking that much, it is that it would get him. So that was like one of my things. But I was sort of, so I was debating between that. And then the other one is basically that I agree with you that his attempt to write this is to release him. He's finally ready. It's been a year. He's obviously been like, you know, just drunk, and I think he's still, yeah, I mean, I think the spectacular goes on, you know, like, I mean, they put it on, they get another actress, you know, he's still the writer, and so he's in demand, but he basically falls into this world of, you know, of the actors and, you know, the people there, and, you know, Toulouse, and kind of, you know, this party, and he becomes, they do actually do the musical of they put on this story, but unfortunately, when they put it on, this was supposed to be his redemption, but in fact, it becomes, you know, kind of a trite spectacle to his mind. I think it becomes a beautiful, you know, people love it. It's highly success. It's like a huge success, but in the end, like, he's failed to because, you know, he's still a new writer. He's failed to really. It's different watching it and putting it on and having dancers and actors and people doing it, and I think it curdles him, you know, it curdles something inside him, that because this was supposed to be his way of letting their love live on, and instead, and you know, this is his interpretation, like in his head, but I think that is what. And basically, he continues to be the spike, but he starts to, I think most of his relationships end up being, you know, sort of, do end up being with other prostitutes so that he doesn't ever have to fall in love again. I think the alcoholism, he'll sort of give into that, and then, you know, I think he'll become that guy, you know, that kind of like guy at the end of the bar that you sort of avoid. You know, when you work at a bar, you're like, oh, yeah, that guy, who has these moments of like, you know, super joy and fun, and then like just like darkness and bitterness and anger, and everything kind of curdles around him. And I do think he stays in Paris, and I do think that he, you know, I think he dies basically getting robbed. And he's so drunk, you know, he like ends up passing out, and then like kind of, you know, sort of throwing up, or he dies of cirrhosis. But just something like, I imagine him dying on the same streets where he fell in love, and like, you know, he sort of like ends up kind of choking on his own vomit, kind of drunken, like you're, you know, and one alcoholic death option, that one. So I think I too believe it ends tragically, but now I feel like I don't know why it had to go so dark for me, but it did.
Very tragic.
Is this the part where I bring it down even worse?
Oh, good. I don't have to feel so guilty.
Well, I mean, Meg touched on it. They were really, really close to one another physically. And so given the nature of tuberculosis being very contagious, I consider that to be, originally my first thought was this, I think, honestly, it could go one of two ways because, Polina, you bring an interesting point. There's a lot of aftermath happening after what happened at the Moulin Rouge. I mean, the Duke is not like vanquished. He's still kind of there. And like, just because
and he now owns it and he didn't die.
Yeah. He didn't die. His henchman was just kind of temporarily just knocked out or something at best. So I thought about, when you were talking about it, I'm just like, dang it, killing him off with tuberculosis just seems so easy now because it's, it's right there for the taking, right, Meg?
Yeah, it's just the obvious answer. I went for the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, but again, if you hadn't been here, that would have been my low-hanging fruit. So I'm actually going to keep it because it's just two things. I mean, there's so much aftermath, but I think the aftermath just kind of helps to make up the rest of what I'm going to say. And this is terrible, and I apologize, but yes. He dies. We're going to call it tuberculosis because I think if it took her out the way that it did, where she looked fantastic, but then bam, I'm dead. He can still look fantastic.
Which is not how consumption plays out. Or tuberculosis. Not even close.
If the Wikipedia articles I read a long time ago are to be believed.
Right.
Yes. Because I also am not a doctor. But my perception of it is the framing device of him trapped in there and he's writing the novel. So the thing is that he catches it, he dies quickly. I think that room where he's writing their story and reliving the pain, I think that's him in hell.
Oh.
Whoa.
I really
That's amazing. No, keep going. This is amazing.
No, that's it. It's just, once again, I considered all the men in this movie, with the exception of, what was it, Chocolat, to be their own villains. And that review that I had referred to earlier, there's one observation that one of the reviewers does where it's just like watching him scream at her in public under the guise of it being part of the play. And they made reference to it as being written in the play as well. It's just like, he throws money at her and screams, I've paid my whore. And he just so easily lets that jealousy consume him. And one could make the argument that that's just how hot their love burned, that he could be so destroyed at her betrayal, be it, for his own life or not. I think that just this way he treated her and the way he just was so cavalier about it, not only is he going to be punished by her dying by her own illness, but he's going to die as well. And he's going to suffer of having to write that story of them for all of eternity.
For all of eternity.
I mean, if you're Meg and you rewind it and watch it again, yeah, that's Christian getting his punishment of the story being told of him writing it over and over again. Think about it. It's so meta. Ooh, I'm awesome.
Are you sure you're not a writer, Diana? Because it can feel like purgatory sometimes.
Holy crap. Oh, that's scary. I mean, being afraid of having to finish something, that's a nightmare in terms of writing it out. I get that. So, I mean, as a professional writer, Meg, is it purgatory?
Sometimes it feels that way.
Yeah. Well, don't write about your
write for work, which is like a much bigger part of my job now, and I'm like, I need to get over this because every time I have to do it, which is all the time, I'm like, it feels like a paper, like that feeling like you have a paper due.
Yeah.
And you haven't quite started, and and I'm like, I need to get over this because this is a major part of my job now.
Yeah.
So if you have any tips for that, please send them my way.
I don't know if I do, because when you write long form novels like I do, that's the only thing I can speak to. And then it's more like the opposite problem. It's like, hey, you get to revise this endlessly for literally years. Have fun
like
with that.
purgatory for the rest of
Exactly.
So does that sound attractive that there's no deadline and you just get to basically, rewrite this for the rest of your life? Or does it
Oh
literally
no,
shut
I was
down?
so relieved when my book actually got published because then it was like, hey, you can't make any changes to this anymore. It's over. It's published.
Whoa.
So,
I mean, I
it's
could
called,
submit changes to my editor, but no, I'm not going to do that.
so in case you're wondering, your book is called It's Red Tea, right? Am I right?
Red Tea, it is a murder mystery set in Japan, and there is a romantic subplot. It's not as beautiful or sweeping as Moulin Rouge, but there's some kissing if you want that.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had a
Oh,
great,
thank
I
you.
just really enjoyed reading it, and I say go to, well, these days your local bookseller, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a fan.
Yeah, go to your local online retailer and make sure you social distantly watch or read this. Wait,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to be safe while simultaneously telling people to shop local online. Does that work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, well, bookstores know how to mail things as well. So
That's totally awesome. In fact, we'll definitely link to the your novel, Meg, and that'll have all the different mechanisms for people to be able to make a purchase.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Oh man. Well, okay. So it's also my understanding that you're on 2 very wonderful podcasts. Can you tell us about those as well?
Sure. I co-host a couple of podcasts. I co-host the Indoorswomen podcast, which is a pop culture podcast with a positive spin. We chat about movies, books, TV shows, all sorts of fandom-related stuff that we love. And we play silly games and give recommendations every episode. And I also co-host Pod Appétit, which is a Bon Appetit fancast. We recap Bon Appetit's YouTube content and we recreate their dishes. So you can find those podcasts at indoorswomen.com, podappetitpodcast.com, and you can find me in general at megmezeske.com. That's Mezeske. Or find me on Twitter. I'm at Meg Writes Words, which is easier to remember than my impossible to spell last name. So
Yeah, she's an excellent follow from all of those accounts. So please do it. I am myself. I'm not only a fan. I'm also a client. What does that make sense? Oh man. Well, okay. If you're already following Meg and you're clicking subscribe and to all of this stuff, we would greatly appreciate it if you followed us on Twitter and Instagram. And we're at HEAMCast.
HEAMCAST.
Yeah, and we're on Facebook at Happily Ever Aftermath, and you can rate, review, and subscribe us. It really helps other people find the podcast, and we really appreciate you getting the word out. Oh man,
that was fun. Oh my god, thank you so much for choosing this movie. That was a blast.
Well, thank you again so much for having me. I had such a blast the last times I was on for July. And I always just love being a guest on your podcast. I'm a fan of the podcast, so it's great to be able to come here and chat with you ladies. And yeah, just kind of to summarize, I really love Moulin Rouge. It's one of my favorite movies, so I'm so glad I got to chat with you guys about it.
Oh, really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, I'm really glad I got to rewatch it. I enjoyed it. I was when Diana told me that it was going to be our pick, I was like, I'm really looking forward to seeing that movie again, and I really enjoyed it even more. And talking about it actually more than I thought, and talking about it makes me actually enjoy it even more. So
nice.
Thanks.
Yeah. So something to point out, though, is that after watching the movie, I mean, as much as I don't like musicals, I still enjoy these songs, even if, like, I'm like, Ewan McGregor is singing this different than Elton John. I don't care for this as much as if I were listening to Elton John right now. So I just kind of pop the music on and I start dancing around my kitchen. But then I start to get a little bit funky. So
oh yeah, I know. You get a little like sweaty these, And it's midsummer. Yeah. What do you do? I have the same problem, Diana, and I have no idea what to do. Do you have any tips?
Well, your mileage may vary, but I myself really appreciate our sponsor, Frankie and Murr, and their Fight the Foot Funk. We've got a humidity thing going on with the apartment. And so what I do is I do a spritz of that. And all of a sudden it's just like, ooh, the citrus comes out and it's just like really just overpowers the funk in the area. And I'm just back to normal.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I think we keep saying this, but like, I have to say I appreciate aromatherapy, especially because we're all spending a lot of time in the same rooms, but, you know, in different roles, like, you know, the coworker, the friend, the parent, the child, the, you know, aunt, uncle, the spouse. I was going to get to the spouse, always the spouse in like more, you know, like in the same place. You have to switch roles all the time. And moods, I find like scent, and especially like something like a room spray where I don't have to like find the, you know, have to find a light or be like, has been, the Frankie and Murr have been really kind of key to keeping me, you know, comfortable and sane these days. So.
Yeah, and if you need a couple more additions to your collection.
I do, actually. Do you have any tips?
Well, I mean, if you go to frankieandmurr.com, that's FrankieandMaygregor, you can go take a look at their collection of aromatherapies. And if you make a purchase and use the promo code HAPPILY1,
that's HAPPILY and the number 1.
You'll save 20% off your entire purchase, and orders over $40 ship free domestically in the United States. Sorry, our international listeners.
And there's something so delightful about getting a package from Frankie and Murr. It's like filled with treats and like just fun, delightful, sunny things. So, you know, it's definitely like that. It's always exciting to get a package anyway, but this is like, if you get a package and you're in a hurry for whatever reason, wait to open your Frankie and Murr package until you can like really enjoy it and like look at all the little presents that you'll get.
Yeah. So if you make a purchase, use our promo code, you're going to, you know, save some money and support us. So we greatly appreciate it.
We really do.
Yeah. So
you know what? I'm going to jump in on your ad here and just say that I'm really enjoying my Frankie and Murr Under the Influence, which is a lavender scent. One of my favorite types of scents. I love lavender. It's very soothing. It's awesome.
Oh, lavender's the best.
I'm a big fan of that one too. Yeah, lavender.
Yep. I'm a sucker for the lavender. Yeah. Thanks, Meg.
Thanks, Frankie and Murr.
All right. So next time, well, I mean, we've already kind of tipped our hand and that it's Ewan MAYGregor. So we're going to be doing next Down with Love, because apparently Ewan McGregor has to be in some sort of not contemporary times, I guess.
You know, it's a lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
Hey, Meg, like, would you, I mean, I don't know, would you, like, it feels a little awkward to ask, but would you join us? Like, I mean,
you know, I just have so many social engagements and just, you know, going everywhere that, no, just kidding. I would love to join you guys.
Yes, making lemons out of the lemonade of being inside.
Remotely lock the door. I don't know. Keep her here. I don't know how it works.
We did a Skype call for 2 weeks. Do you think they'll like let us know yet?
Never. No, that's awesome. All right. So we're going to do Down with Love, the continuation of Ewan MAYGregor, and Meg's coming back.
Woohoo!
I'm excited.
You're not sick of me yet.
Oh, God, no. Never.
No, that is not possible. Challenge accepted.
Yeah. We're willing to take that chance.
Let's talk about Robert Downey Jr. maybe next year.
Oh, good one.
All right, write that down. Okay.
Yeah, I will forget that.
All excitable now. Okay. All right. So then, we'll be all here next time.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Bye.
Bye.